Hello, friends. Welcome aboard the Round Trip Stories podcast, where we share stories of moving around the world and back again, reflecting on the lessons we've learned along the way. My name is Melissa.
And my name is Tracy, and we are so glad you're joining us for today's episode. Welcome back to part 2 of our interview with Major Ben Scott, a U.S. Army Signal Corps officer who grew up as a third culture kid in Africa and Germany. He and his wife are now raising 5 third culture kids of their own back in Germany, where Ben is stationed. At 15 years old, Ben returned to the United States for high school. Despite a smooth first year, he entered a difficult time of negotiating what it meant to be an American teenager in a large suburban public school. Find out how Ben got through this reverse culture shock, finally got a car, and what his current recommendations are for TCKs now. So buckle your seatbelts and make sure your tray tables and seats are in their upright positions as part 2 of Ben's round trip story gets ready for takeoff. So we are back for part 2 with our friend, Major Ben Scott. And he is coming to us from Germany, and we're so thankful that he's talking with us today. So, Ben, can you just do like a quick recap on your backstory? So, what are you doing these days, and where do you live now?
Absolutely, and great to be with you. So we are, my wife and kids, we live in Ramstein Air Base in Germany. I am a major in the U.S. Army, a communications officer, and I'm stationed here in Germany. But I was a missionary kid, third culture kid, basically my whole growing up life. Spent high school in America, but before then I lived in 2 continents and traveled a lot and been thinking through these questions and these themes my whole life. So appreciate being on this great podcast.
And we're so glad that you spent a lot of time thinking about these issues. I mean, I know it hasn't always been easy, and we just appreciate all of the adult third culture kids who've come on. And that's our series right now. So if you're joining us in the middle of our series, we're doing third culture kids, people who have grown up their part of their childhood overseas, outside of their passport country. Also, just quickly tell us where you grew up, and then why you left those places, particularly talking about the transition back to the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, I spent my first 4 years of life in Africa, in Nairobi, Kenya. I moved there with my family when I was 4 months old. So earliest stages of one's life. And then from 1st to 8th grade, I was in Berlin, Germany. So my dad was a missionary in both those locations. And so I spent essentially the first 15 years of my life outside of America, and definitely all my school life I was outside of America. And it re-entered back into America for high school, which was fascinating. Like everything, a lot of complications in one's life is stuff outside of your control. So my grandma, she was not in good health. And so it was at a point where she needed help. However, not to get too personal here, it was also because
This is going to be on the the internet. So
yeah, no, I'm perfectly fine with that. But one of the other things too was because my parents, and this wasn't their main reason, but they were concerned about some of how I was developing, like socially and emotionally, in Germany, and they were not. They were concerned about that, and I think third culture
Interesting.
kids, it's like, sometimes when um, use crutches, or you break an arm or something, and your dominant side gets really, really strong, but then, your other side is kind of weak. And I think you see that a lot of times in third culture kids, where they're really strong in some areas where you're like, wow, like this is like a 14-year-old and he could be my pastor or something like that. And,
Uh-huh.
but then they're like really, really immature or really, unstable in some other areas where you're like, whoa, like, we gotta,
Yeah.
we gotta train the
Yeah.
basics here. And,
There's a
and
discrepancy
yeah, it happens a
between
lot. It really does. And it's not their fault, and it wasn't my fault, but it's just the nature of the game where you have a very interesting growing up life, and there's some really good strengths, but then there's some foundations that are hard to build in an environment like that. So the short answer is my parents moved back to the States because my grandma needed assistance, but there were some things going on in the kids' lives, and I was one of those that
Yeah.
they were concerned about it too.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, kudos to your parents for paying attention. So, we're going to ask you some questions about how that went then when you did move back to the US and that repatriation process, that journey. So, tell us first a story or just in general about that initial transition when you guys moved back.
So I wasn't doing great in Germany. That was one at the very end of it, and didn't have friends. Was pretty isolated. Was a tough place. I had a really good first year back in America,
Mm,
and that's not always normal for
right.
people coming in for third culture kids. Like my brother had the complete opposite. Absolutely terrible.
Older brother or younger brother?
Older brother, yeah, absolutely. And not to get into specifics of all the details, but my first year was really good. I felt really, really welcomed. I was at a Christian high school.
Was it a small town or a large town where you
It
landed?
was Winston-Salem, North Carolina, so kind of medium town, but we were at a small Baptist high school, and the first 12 months were really good. It was abnormal for what typically happens, but I was
Yeah,
also in a pretty not a good state at the end of my Germany time, so
right.
so it was really God's providence of healing me. A lot of my family members and my brothers were having a really, really tough time. My tough time came the next year.
Okay, so tell us about what happened next after that first lovely year.
Yeah, that was the year so we moved again in the middle of my high school. Yeah, so it's really interesting coming in from a life overseas with so much privilege in a lot of ways. I had been, as a 15, 16-year-old, now in a public American high school with 3,000 students. I had been to more countries than probably anyone in my class, maybe combined,
Yeah,
including my teacher. I
probably.
had been to over 20 countries. I spoke fluent German. And yet, my parents couldn't afford to buy me a car, and I was 16 years old. We lived kind of walking distance from the school, but in suburban Atlanta, you really need a car to have a life, especially,
Mhm.
when your peers are starting to have cars. And this is something that people just need to understand about coming back to the States. I was more independent as a 9-year-old in Germany than as a 18-year-old in America. I didn't get a car until I was 18. I was
Yeah.
ostracized. I was made fun of. My
Mhm.
parents let me travel in Berlin as a 9-year-old to go buy food at a fast food place, to go get whatever because I was on the train. It's very safe. And
Mhm.
and yet here I was as a 17, 18-year-old, didn't have a car, had to, struggle through that, and,
Yeah.
but cars are
Yeah.
big because it enables, one to have a social life and to feel connected to that area. It was very tough for me because basically, I had to rely on other people. I had to try and bike somewhere, which, in
Mhm.
suburban Atlanta, if you're trying to be a cool kid,
So
not
that
not
wasn't
not
cool.
ideal. Um, And so here I was, I had been to Paris, I had been to Rome, I had been to London, I had been on safaris.
Your family had toured as
Yeah.
all the
No,
churches.
that's even a great point too. When we went back to the States on on furloughs, it was a completely different thing than actually living there too. People cared about you
Mhm.
when you were something exotic or different and you were, special in a way. But when we moved back to the States, like all that was gone. And
Yeah,
but that your history wasn't gone. And so you're just
right.
like and you're just there.
And that's gotta be so confusing as a kid, like, to go from sort of this kind of semi-celebrity to just another kid that now nobody wants to hear my story about getting jumped on by a cheetah when I was 3
No,
years
and they
old.
think you're
What?
weird, and I remember bringing it up to people, and, like, either they'd call me a Nazi, and kinda joking, but it kinda got annoying after a while, or
Yeah.
and then you're also kind of in high school, so you're interested in, like, dating or whatever and being an attractive person, and that's weird too because the girls are all just, they grew up in America, and they don't care about your story, and, you're different,
Yeah.
so that's definitely something as well. And there's the history. I mean, I didn't know what like homecoming was. High school football games were definitely a new experience for me. And then coming back to the States, one, you don't feel like you belong there. Two, people have relationships that they've had their whole lives that you don't have. So you're automatically the new person. I mean, that's kind of normal for moving anyway. But then three, you have all this background that makes you think maybe you're wealthier than you are because of your life experiences. And then you're
Mm,
really
mhm.
trying to kind of reconcile, like, I can talk to you about this world class city or this historical place or all this stuff that really the top, 1% of Americans get to experience. As
Yeah.
a 16-year-old, I could talk to you about what's it like to go to the Vatican or what's it like to, go to the Alps. I skied in the Alps,
Mhm.
as a
Mhm.
14-year-old. And, so all these kind of cool
Yeah.
experiences that people in America only experience if you're wealthy. But missionary
Right.
kids and third culture kids do really, really cool things. But then when they go back in their home country, at least for missionary kids, you're middle class to lower middle class. And you're just I didn't have a car. I couldn't
Right.
I couldn't go anywhere, and so it was a huge
Yeah.
transition, and,
Yeah.
I mean, I remember having to work, at a minimum wage job, and it was just and that was okay, but it was just you don't have the basics, and that's what I'm trying to kind of just underline is
Mhm.
that, you may be really strong in some areas, and then in some areas, you're very underdeveloped, and
Right.
that's very common,
Mhm.
and I just tell people that are listening that you shouldn't be surprised, and for parents to just know that your kids are gonna be struggling with that type of stuff.
Yeah, I was just thinking to be aware of those points, right? A lot of communities in the United States are very car dependent. I know
Mhm.
here in California, public transportation isn't that great. And I feel like also even when I was in China, I felt this that having a car is like this cultural rite of passage that we have as Americans.
Mhm.
And we didn't have a car in China. So I felt like a little kid.
Well, and I think it doesn't even end in high school. I mean, the whole
Right.
college experience and after college, I mean, like dating, how do you interact with people of the opposite sex that you're attracted to is complicated for third culture kids. They go deep really
Mhm.
fast. That's
Oh.
that's weird sometimes.
Uh-huh.
Because remember what I was talking about, like we clicked with people that were of similar background and we saw them like every 2 years. And so we went deep really quickly with them, the other
Mhm.
fellow missionary kids. So I made some mistakes that we laugh on, but like, you're on a first date and, in college and you go deep
You're
really quickly, telling
And
your
they're
life
like,
story and you're like, whoa,
"Okay."
exactly. But that's a typical thing for missionaries with missionary kids with, that. And then a lot of times, and this is one thing that I love about my wife, and I hope people, can find a spouse like that. But to really find someone that's interested in your background and that
Mhm.
wants to visit. I mean, my wife Grace, I mean, she really was so excited to go to Germany, to experience where I grew up in. And that's so important,
Mhm.
but, that's not always the case, and that's not always the case when you're
Right.
re-entering, especially if you're not married and you're trying to get married or you're trying to have a social life, even in a Christian environment. it's complicated because the people that you're interested in dating or interested in talking to and hanging out with may not appreciate your background at all.
Tell us what was helpful? What helped during those hard stages, or what helped kind of afterwards get you out of some of those, challenging times?
Yeah,
Yeah.
great question. I mean, some of it comes just with age,
Mhm.
and time. I think a huge lesson in life is that, God brings us through seasons, and there are more difficult seasons and such, and people do mature. And so for instance, eventually I got a car, and that was nice. So
Mhm.
I could be, somewhat social and more integrated in the culture. I moved to college and everyone was new then. And so, I was less of the outsider in high school. And then after college, I joined the military and everyone's new then.
Mhm.
So one thing that people have to understand is that the current situation is not always going to be the situation that they're going to be in.
Right.
And so if you're having a really hard time entering into life after being overseas for a long time, your current situation is not always going to be that way. And so
Yeah.
that's a comfort thing. And that's what happened with me too. Um, but two, you have to, in some ways, even go through the stages of grief about your
Mhm.
own history. I would argue
Mhm. I agree.
in order to be a healthy individual, you have to let part of your past go, even though it's very important to you. And it doesn't mean that you don't bring it up. It doesn't mean that you don't find a spouse that, like I did, that values it. But at least for me, I wanted to be understood. I wanted to be appreciated. I wanted people to understand what it had been like living in Africa and Germany for, my whole life until high school. And I just couldn't keep people, in order to have relationships, I had to let that go because most of the Americans didn't
Mm.
care. You know? Most of the people I went to
Mhm.
high school with didn't care, and definitely most of the people that I met later on didn't care.
So you had to adjust your expectations for people.
Absolutely. 100%. And I would say that missionary kids and third culture kids have very high expectations of what relationships should be, because of their
Mhm.
background and their upbringing. And I would say, um, they're typically pretty strong in that because they have to develop those skills at a young age in order to survive. But at the same time, you have to also let your past go, be thankful for your great vast experiences, and then embrace the current location you're in, and love the
Mhm.
people that you're around.
I have one more question for you before Tracy asks our kind of concluding
Yeah.
questions. But this is our special TCK choose your own adventure question. So you get to pick one of these three questions to answer. So, A, how often do you think about being or having been a TCK, or, does how much does being an adult TCK affect your life now? Or B, what are some favorite experiences, maybe that you haven't already told us, about connecting with other TCKs? Or C, do you have a favorite funny story about your time abroad or life or transition back?
Yeah, I'll go with the first one. Yeah. How often do you think about being a third culture kid? All the time. And my wife always jokes around, like, I love sports, but I'm always like, dear, I need a sport team. I need a team because where am I from? Like, I can't. Who do I root for? Do I root for like anyway? Because I've moved
Yeah.
around so much, and it's kind of a running joke that my wife says that I'm homeless, and I don't, I'm going to remain
Mhm.
homeless, and it's definitely a part of my identity. I've leaned
Mhm.
into it probably more than many people have, but I think it's super critical, and I obviously value it, and we've chosen to live overseas in the military. That was a choice of ours, as well as the Army sending us, but we were involved in that process. And yeah, so I value being a third culture kid. And I want
Mhm.
people to know that because so much of it is a dance between pride and shame, when
Mm.
you're in that stage. And to know that, on the other side, when you're in your 30s or in your 40s and things may be just different in life, and you have
Yeah.
different other issues or whatever, um, you can just be proud. Like for me, like, I know I'm probably never gonna have a home. I'm always gonna be kinda homeless, even when I move back to the States eventually someday, I doubt that that's gonna feel like home to me. I mean, how do you
Right.
just
Sure.
wipe away your whole growing up life and say that never happened? Of course, like, it did happen. So to answer your question, it affects my life in funny ways, like, trying to figure out who I'm gonna root for, who's my sports
Mhm.
team, um
Mhm.
to deeper ways in terms of I value it so much that my kids are third culture kids now.
Yeah.
And it's so much a part of my life that it's almost kind of a family business, if you will.
I like your illustration about the dance. I don't know, it's because of I like dancing, but dance between pride and shame and I don't know if you particularly meant during those years when you came back and were adjusting and
Yeah.
transitioning. Um, but I feel like I dance between being a jerk and being nice, because I'm like, was I being a jerk? Uh, but I guess that's the tension. And I have also realized as we've gotten older that there's so many parts to a story or to a
Yeah.
situation. And so there's always going to be some tension. There's always going to be two sides or multiple sides. And
Yeah.
okay, so these are our final questions, Ben. We'd love for you to tell us a final story about how your time abroad still continues to add value to your life.
So how does living abroad add value? I see my life story kind of in the flow of Hebrews, what is it? Hebrews 11. And I would encourage Christians to embrace that chapter, whether or not you're called to live in America or called to be in a more transient role. We are strangers and aliens on this earth. Whether you have a beautiful home with many acres, God bless you for it. I'm thankful for that. We need people who have that life experience, but don't get too comfortable because eventually God's going to call you to be in the kingdom that lasts forever, and it's the same as me. Like we are all strangers and aliens. This world is not our end story. And
Mhm.
death reminds us of that. And saying goodbye reminds us of that, or
Yep.
loss. But you know, so how does my third culture kidness remind me? We are strangers, and I mean, someday, frankly, I would like to settle down with my wife. I mean, I think she's earned it, and I would love to, have a little bit more stability. So I'm all for that, and I hope that can be our story. However, I think third culture kids have a beauty to them, a richness to them that is characteristic to them more than other believers, where they can really understand the Hebrews 11 message, which is so vital. I mean, Christ himself said, foxes have holes, and I have no place to lay my head.
Mhm.
Birds of the air have nests, but I have no place to lay my head. I mean, there is a comfortability in the American Western mindset, while very, very good, um, it is not always good to remind us of what our true identity is in Christ, which is that we belong
Right.
to his kingdom, and our ultimate home is not of this earth. And I think something that
Yeah.
third culture kids can really share with us is their experience in that. Because they know
Mhm.
firsthand they don't belong. I mean, you ask a third culture kid, "Do you belong in America?" And they'll tell you, "No." I promise you they will. Or they will tell you that it doesn't totally feel like home.
Yeah.
And if you would have asked me if I belonged in Germany, I would tell you no, because I'm not a German, you know? And and
Right.
and so
Right.
but it doesn't mean that, we're better or we're worse, but it's a part of our life story. And I think that, it adds value because we're able, especially as Christians, we're able to connect to the greater story of the church, and yeah, I think that's important.
Yes, the church on earth is a big story. And it
Hmm.
is really important to have that global perspective,
Mm.
not only that, we are aliens here on this earth, but also that we have lots and lots of brothers and sisters all over the world. And
Hmm.
it's not just us in our culture.
Amen.
Okay, what is one last word of encouragement or advice you can give our listeners, Ben, Scott?
Yeah, no. Well, first of all, thank you again for having me on. Yeah, I mean, kind of what we had talked about a little earlier. I really think be patient with yourself.
Hmm.
Be patient with yourself. Lean into your emotions, but also be willing to let go of trying to make people understand you. It's very, very
Hmm.
difficult, but,
Hmm.
embrace where you are today and grieve the pain of not being able to be understood completely or to connect with your third cultureness or the country that you left behind. Um, but be faithful for where God has you. I think that's the best. And I think people are going to be happier that way, but also I think that God's going to be able to use you in ways that you can't imagine because while learning to love that American who has never left his hometown in 50 years and you've been to 30
Hmm.
countries and have, seen the Mona Lisa 5 times or whatever. Um, you're going to be able to love them. Everyone has so much to offer, even the individuals that have never left their hometown.
Yeah.
Yeah, I go back to, the church. I mean, because ultimately our home is with Christ, and we belong to the church, whether we're settled in one town or whether we move around a lot. And to love the individuals you're with, and God will bring about people in your life. I promise you, where you're going to be able to minister to them. I promise you, where they're going to be
Mm.
new, where they're going to be third culture kids, or they're going to be from a different country, and you're going to be observing them and you're going to be able to minister to them in ways that you have never imagined.
Mm.
Yeah, so I feel very honored to be a third culture kid. Love it. It's been very challenging, but it's a beautiful, beautiful part of my story, and I hope others can see that too.
As we land this interview, we hope that you have been inspired by Ben's TCK stories of returning to the U.S. He recognizes the amazing strengths of being a TCK, and he also knows that there are some weaknesses. Going through a U.S. high school and college experience helped to strengthen some of his American culture muscle, but not without growing pains. He remembers dancing between pride and shame of his growing up years. Even though eventually he became stronger and knew the dance steps of American culture, he still chose to return to life overseas, this time to serve in the U.S. military. He encourages all of us to be faithful where God has us wherever in the world we are. And no matter what leg of the journey you are on, friends, we are so glad you have brought us along with you.
Come back next time to hear our interview with Ana Julia Borges, a Brazilian third culture kid who spent 7 years of her childhood in Uruguay. You won't want to miss Ana Julia's interview.
If you're enjoying our podcast, we'd love it if you would leave us a review in your podcast app. And don't forget, you can visit our website at roundtripstories.com to see photos of our guests and to join our email list. And of course, tell your friends to travel the world with us. No passport, no packing, and no goodbyes required. Thanks so much for listening, friends. We'll see you next time.
Like when we're working out our faith as far as how we interact with other humans, right? We want to be
Right.
as loving as possible, but sometimes I just like, oh, I'm being a jerk right now. And so
Or
I
you
guess
could
what
you
you're
may
saying,
just be being German.
prideful. Well, I don't know. I mean, I am a little bit German, but
Which I mean as a compliment.
funny.
I mean as a compliment.
Oh, thank you.
You would fit in. I mean, I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is that that's hilarious.